Hi, this is the painting with commentary video for the Reaper Bones Miniatures Kaladrax, episode 50 of Paint to Life. The largest miniature that I've ever painted to date, and quite a fun time. A lot of grief this miniature gave me, but I really was happy with the end result. So here's the painting lineup. You can pause the video here if you want to see all the different colors from Citadel line that we used to paint, and they'll come up again during the video. So here's the Reaper Bones Dark Heaven Kaladrax. It might be hard to find these days as it's out of print. It's quite big, you can see it up against the paintbrush, and when I started with this model it was already pre-assembled because the person that gave it to me had already glued it all together, which made painting it quite tricky, and I actually had to break it apart. So the very first thing I did, I broke it apart. So I primed it with a Wraithbone rattle can. You can see his front forearm and his back leg, and I'm also using a base gray here from Vallejo. This is the first time I've used a Vallejo paint. It's for airbrush. I picked them up to try, and it worked just fine. You know, I like Citadel products as well, but I don't have any Citadel of the airbrush line, and it's just nice to go ahead, plug it in, and just use it without having to worry about thinning it down too much. Now, as I was saying, to break apart this Kaladrax, I was able to do so at the shoulder joint and the pelvis. There's a bar that goes through each hip bone and connects, and that's great because I don't know how I would have been able to do nearly as interesting a job if I had not been able to break the model apart. And I should say, while I broke it apart, I didn't actually break anything. I didn't have to fix or glue anything back later other than just to reassemble it. So obviously the crazy glue or whatever glue was used was not too unforgiving. So now, this is a source picture of marble with gold veining. The base on this model is my favorite part, the most interesting part. It has these ruin looks, and I always say start with some source material. So you can see these big blocks, they look like marble. So I'm taking a ceramite white and I'm stippling it on top of the Wraithbone. Since they're to be ruins, and I wanted to paint them as a marble, and that's what I start with. So the Wraithbone is already kind of like a creamy color, and by applying stipply effect, I put too much on, as you see there. I use my paper towel to scoop some of it off. I just want to get multiple colors shining through. Now I already primed the rock area with the gray, which we'll go over again later, so it's okay if you make a little mistake. But the marble part of this is as follows. I started with the Wraithbone, then I used the ceramite white stippled on so that the Wraithbone still kind of showed through, and it was almost like a creamy white. And that's what I'm doing here, all of the marble pieces. And anywhere where the marble is flat, it's going to be polished and later glossed, and anywhere where it's rough, it's going to stay unglossed like stone that hasn't been polished. So now, if you have any material like this, packaging material, it's like tight, constrained bubble wrap, get some and cut it into rectangular pieces for the next step. That's what I used. You can see it in my hand here. Administratum gray, because I don't want to brush it on. I don't want to paint this on. I want to drag it on. I want to scratch it on. You could use a sponge too, but my sponge was applying too much. So now I'm using a gray directly on top of the stippled white. And the result is clearly that we are getting the scratchy, dry application. Now, the paint is wet, it's not a dry brush, but by using a sponge, a hard sponge like this, and I drag the sponge across the flat surfaces, it's applying gray. What I'm trying to do is get veins or like, because we know there's gold veins in marble, but there's also some off-whites. So it was working well, a little too well, as we'll see in the next shot, because when it was finished, my marble was very gray, and it wasn't my favorite. My wife didn't really think it looked like marble because marble should be white. And when I look back at my source, excuse me, when I look back at my source material, it was all indeed white. So I put a little too much gray on, but not having ever done a marble technique before, I thought this would be a good way to layer up the different colors in the rock, the different veins. And it was, just I went a little too heavy on the gray. So now the next step is to use a tool to apply AURIC Armor Gold is the gold that I like to use in this to make these gold veins throughout the marble. And I think right now the gray has a very banked look marble to me, gray and white, and then the gold. I liked it when I was doing it. And you can see it right there. I don't know what your thoughts are on the gray marble. It looks more stony. But the key here is to not apply the gold with a brush. I tried using a very fine brush and it looked like drawing lines of gold onto stone. No matter how tiny I made it, you need to apply this very thin in such a way. So what I do is I use this tool. You could use a knife, but this is a good tool, the sculpting tool. I apply a bunch of it on there with the flat edge of the blade, and then I use the sharp edge of the blade to kind of scrape it and drag it like I'm cutting. See how it goes on so thin when you use the corner? Almost too thin, see? It's like using a pen that's running out of ink. You just have to keep going, but that's kind of the idea. I don't want it to go gold all the way from left to right. I want it to be these little flakes where it comes up and then disappears. So using the edge of this tool to draw it on basically was kind of my jam. And ultimately in some spots it was lumpy and too thick, and then I used the side of the blade to scrape it off, and in some cases even use the flat edge to push down and smear. So you're about to see the finished picture of how this turned out. Make sure you apply it not too much, but everywhere. You don't want so much so that it looks gold. It's supposed to be flaky, right? Like veins. That's what marble is. It's a stone with all these different colors and minerals in it. So that's what it looked like when it was finished. And it's got the gray, a little heavy. You can see the yellow gold and the white. And that was before I had done any type of shiny varnish to it. But when we look back at our original source material, you see it's kind of just white and gold. And yes, there are some off-whites and some grays in there, but it was a little too much with what I had here. So even though that took a lot to do to get to that point, almost a whole day of my timeline, and I'm sure it was passable, and some of you might like it as is, but I concluded that I was going to attempt to make it more white. So using a Praxetti white dry brush, I dry brushed on top of my existing gray marble. Now this really nullified my nice leafing that I had done with the gold to look like veins. It made them very subtle and hard to see. So I had to reapply the gold on top of the gold, which let me touch up some areas that I had done. And ultimately there's a close-up of it. As you can see, the flat stone is kind of shiny because I put a varnish on it. So that is how I did marble, and I will do it again sometime, another time on another mini to try and perfect my craft at it. So now we're doing rocks on the base. This base is really crazy. I wish I had taken some pictures of it to show you some stills. You have these areas that seem to have growth, as you can see on top of this woman's head, this sculptures. It's full of, almost looks like vines. They're hard coated into the plastic. The texture of the stone is very bumpy, and it repeats in some spots. And as you can see, I decided that wherever that kind of extra textury rock is, it's not going to be rock. I mean, it'll be rock underneath, but it's going to be like a dirt. And you can see it runs down like vines beside her head, and that's what exactly I'm going to do. I'm going to put some moss down there to look like running. You can see here too, it's textured. So I'm applying the Storm Reaver Fur, or Storm Vermin, whatever this paint was called at the card at the beginning. So anywhere where it's got a pocketed kind of texture, I've decided I'm going to make that dirt, and therefore I'm going to paint it Storm Vermin Fur. And it has a kind of brown quality to it. The rest of the stones everywhere around the marble are just going to be flat gray, and we're going to hit that next in the next little frame here using Eshin Gray. But anywhere where those textured stones were, they are the brown gray. So now here we are. Oh, I lied, it wasn't Eshin Gray, it was Dawnstone. Look at that. So I'm putting on Dawnstone to the other stones. Anytime you have to paint a lot of stone, I personally think that you should use multiple colors. Even though you're going to dry brush and wash and do things, the base color should be different if you can. If you don't have tons of paints to work with, that's okay. Just use a little bit of brown and white to add to the gray or black that you're using if you're mixing your own, just so that you have a little bit more diversity. Because, you know, if you go for a walk and a hike in the forest or an escarpment area, you know, rock is all kinds of different colors, and it's never just one. So I would never paint an entire cliff face just Dawnstone or Eshin Gray. Like, I would add different variants at different spots, just as base. You know, we're going to paint over a lot of this later, but for base, it's good to have multiple colors to start with. So I'm starting to like how this is going to work. The marble is all done, so I'm being very careful not to clip it accidentally. And also, kind of a cool feature is tucked in amongst this is a bunch of skulls. Fun fact about Kaladrax: this model was a mistakenly, it's too large. It's not made to scale. The dragon is super big, but it was a mistake, I guess, at the printer I read. It wasn't supposed to be this big. And you can tell that not from the dragon per se, because the dragon looks impressively large, but the skulls. If this is 28mm, these are giant skulls. I mean, just take a look at those things that I'm painting right now. They're the size of my little fingernail. And obviously, if you put a regular mini up alongside that, that thing's almost 3 times bigger than its head. So this whole miniature should have been 3 times smaller. The skulls included, the dragon, the marbles. But because it came out this way, everyone who ordered a Kaladrax in Reaper Bones' Kickstarter campaign that year got themselves a nice 5-pound piece of PVC plastic. There's also a treasure chest and some treasure. So I'm using SKRAG ground. Boy, I can't speak. I'm using SKRAG brown because it's a brown that's kind of orangey, and I think it goes nice with the marbling. So now we see everywhere that I had the lighter, like the dirt, I'm applying some AGGRAX Earthshade to it. So all the stones that have the pots, the pockets that are somewhat storm-reaven fur, are getting an AGGRAX Earthshade coating just to bring out a little more darkness, some of the contrast. I'm also applying it to all of the skulls. Normally I would use a different contrast paint or whatnot for skulls, but using the Screaming Skull paint with an AGGRAX Earthshade is pretty much the same thing as using Skeleton Horde contrast paint. It's the same base paint and shade mixed in one. Unfortunately, the dragon's left hand is blocking the view here, but you know, I couldn't really tell. But yeah, AGGRAX Earthshade on top of all the dirt areas and on top of all the skulls. There's also little bits of treasure, which we're going to get to soon here too. So now we're going to apply Basilicanum Gray as a contrast paint, and this is the color that I've actually painted the dragon. Mind you, I applied it to my dragon with an airbrush, not necessarily so intense, but I think it looks good on the rocks as a contrast because it hits that Dawnstone and it's transparent, so in some spots it's a little darker than others, and of course the built-in shade of the paint settles into all the cracks and nooks and gives it some shadows, and there you go. So that looks good. Now we're going to apply a Dawnstone dry brush. You recall we painted this Dawnstone to start with. Now to reapply the dry brush just brings out the raised areas. So now that the Basilicanum Gray has dried, reapplying the Dawnstone on top to blend it all together. And I am somewhat touching those dirty brown rocks as well with the dry brush, but not tons. Now WARPLOCK bronze, I wanted this chest to have like a bronze rim, so WARPLOCK is a great dark brown bronze color in the Citadel line. We'll get to that with the dragon. Part of the reason why this mini was frustrating to paint was because I paint miniatures. And this is not miniature, it's very big. So it's very unforgiving. You almost have to be an artist. I'm trying to paint decals on the side of the chest so it looks like a chest, but there's nothing for me. I'm freehand painting, and if you're not good at it, well. So here's the built-in treasure components. I'm putting some Liberator gold onto the Wraithbone Prime just to give them a gold appearance. There's a pearl necklace in there I'm just kind of touching up, and I'm going to apply some swagger to it later, some jewels and diamonds and rubies just to make it pop a little more even. Alright, so now it's time to give our marble a nice shine using a gloss varnish, which wasn't listed at the beginning in the materials, but the gloss varnish thickly applied. It's thickly applied as in I didn't cut it or water it down, but I didn't apply it in globs. You know, you don't want to fill her eyeballs with this stuff so that when it dries, she has this big clump of cloudiness in front of them. So you want to apply it everywhere. And in my case, I only wanted to apply it where the marble had been polished. So her cheeks, her forehead, her skin, the big piece there on the left right there, that big diamond looking piece, of course, that pillar, of course. But the stone in the middle that the dragon actually perches on, that's just raw marble. It's a pillar that's been broken. And the inside of the marble would not be shiny like the outside. It's not been polished. So only apply it to where it's been polished. So now we're going to do some basing. I apply some of my tasty white glue. And I'm going to apply this glue to every one of the brown kind of earthy motes that I had painted, because the stone motes will not have anything growing on them unless a little spills over or I do a little patch here and there, but these earthy motes will. So I put the lots of white tasty glue on there. I use a junk brush to spread it out. Don't use thin down watery glue because, again, it's not tons that you have to do. You want to make sure wherever you put it, it sticks. Marsh blend grass from Gale Force 9 is the this whatever the word is. Man, it's getting late. That's the blend. I love it. It's got a little bit of red in it, some brown. It looks like dirt, but almost a moss dirt. Now, to finish this up, I didn't list all the parts I used in this at the beginning, but basing is a personal preference. You can base it however you want. You don't have to go get island moss from Green Stuff World to recreate this. In fact, I thought it had like a little coral look, and someone on Facebook asked, is that an underwater dragon? There's also basing, rhinestones, diamonds, pearls, silver glitter, gold glitter. You don't go crazy. This isn't a treasure pile, but there were some treasure areas. So in addition to painting them like treasure with the golds and the silvers and the pearl colors that I use, dump a little bit of glitter on there. Each little fleck of glitter looks like a singular coin. It adds another level of interest to the piece when someone looks at it. But back to the basing, I had all this island stuff, and someone on Facebook asked me if it was supposed to be underwater. It does look like coral, I understand that, but I was willing to take that chance because, when you paint, you're always basing things as like grass is green and flowers are red, and it's nice to try something a little different. That's why I bought this kit. When you're going to put in an order from overseas, from Green Stuff World or from another country, you don't want to order $15 and be done with it. I mean, at least make it worth your while. So I bought this pack because I think the colors are fun, and in this instance they work really well. Because if you watch the episode 50 of Paint to Life, this is taking place underground, Cherokee Traslath Rylax's tomb, so to speak. Okay, on to the big boy himself. I took him off. As I told you, I had to break him apart from the base. I started with a Wraithbone primer from a rattle can, which I really recommend. Now, Basilicanium gray is the color. When doing bones, anything, it's kind of boring. Bone Naga, skeletal dragons. I mean, just bones, right? Just start with white and do whatever as I'm doing right now, and then you're done. And I still maintain that. And this is why I was so disappointed with this project, because it was so boring to paint this. But I was happy with my color choice for the bone, and I'll tell you why. Most people paint bones like a yellow or kind of a brown. Skeleton Horde is brown, or Agarros Dunes, or Wraithbone even is like a creamy white. This Basilicanium gray is gray. Surprise. And these bones look to me like bones you'd find in the sun that had been bleached, or they look like old bones, kind of dusty bones. And I've never done bones with gray and white. I always use like the yellowy, dirty dunes kind of, yellow bones. And when I decided to go with the gray, I started applying with the airbrush. I was really happy. This was early, before I got frustrated. But again, you can see, if you don't have an airbrush, I apologize. This would not be a fun project without an airbrush. There's no doubt this would have used a whole pot of paint. To be able to use this airbrush, I'm filming, there's a lot of footage of it, but realistically, you just keep going over and over and getting darker and darker. Now, Leviadon blue, I wanted him to be, his colors, he's kind of glowing blue like the blue dragon that he was. So I'm going to apply Leviadon blue first. And I'm going to try and build up. And I've told you before, when you airbrush, it's easier to go darker, it's harder to go lighter. And then I realized later I don't really know what I'm talking about, so I guess I figured I'd find out for myself if I can go lighter, because that's what I'm going to do here. You see, Leviathan blue is one of the darkest contrast blues that Citadel has. So for me to juice it on there with the airbrush, now I'm going to try an Ultramarines blue on top, hoping that it's going to lighten up. It doesn't. So listen to GMA Tank from a couple weeks ago. I painted these eye holes. They were messy. I painted behind the skull, like the skull knock. It was messy. I liked the way the dragon looked, the skull and everything. I have to paint it over later. I don't think it's on camera. Here's an AETHERMATIC blue. It's like that turquoise color. I realized that trying to lighten up those dark spots on the chest, it wasn't going to work. So I started doing the wings the opposite way. Start with the lighter and build it up with darker. And I couldn't undo the mistake. And as a result, it started to weigh on me. I was getting frustrated. My airbrush kept clogging. I'm still relatively new to using it. I love it though. I had to choose between a 3D printer and an airbrush, and I went with the airbrush first, and I'm glad I did. Just because, the art part of the projects are what we're here to do. We're painting to life. We're not 3D printing to life. It would be fun to have, but maybe in a different time. So now TALASSAR blue. So I wanted those to be lighter on the edges and darker in the middle. So I said, okay, that's kind of cool. TALASSAR blue is pretty. But because I'm still a bit of a noob with the airbrush, a couple times I hit a little too much on there, and it's unforgiving, folks. The overspray, you can't just, like in my previous painting videos, when you just go back and touch up your previous mistake. Just get me the Basilinium gray airbrushed / wraith bone just to touch up this area. You just can't match it ever. So you're really holding yourself to ensure that as you do this, you do a good job, and you don't overspray or accidentally put too much on, because then you're kind of SOL. So I let a couple days pass, and I put a KANTOR blue. So now I have these multiple colors on the wings, which didn't really blend as well as I thought they would. So I'm using this KANTOR blue heavily watered down so that I can blend as best I can. I mean, I'm the first person to say there's lots of better miniature painters out there than us, and absolutely there are. And I love the storytelling more than anything. I only do these videos so you guys can have a kind of one, because I already have the footage, and two, because you guys can just see what is it like for a GMA tank to paint this, what goes through my head, right? But realistically, I would rather them just stay away till it comes out. And when you ultimately see it, I'm trying to blend, and I'm getting frustrated. Days have passed. I'm working these wings. See how messy it is? On a miniature, things are mini. When you have to fleck the wings and just do this one little area, you can just do one little area. And you can use a little fleck, and it's done. For a big model like this, you can't just fleck. You have to go everywhere. And when you do, you risk. So here I am adding another color inside. This is the another blue, not KANTOR, but the other one from the beginning. And now how many times have I painted these wings that you guys have been watching and listening to me, right? What am I doing here? This is demoralizing to me, and I was not happy with the way they looked. I wasn't getting the blends that I thought I was going to get. I slopped on the edges. Then I had this brilliant idea to use BARROTH blue, which is like an edging material. And BARROTH was going to be the hero of the day. I'm putting it back on the edges. So I started with arithmetic blue, and then I built it up too much. So now all of my is gone. So I'm using this edging blue to put it on the edge, which is kind of reproducing what I already had, but lesser, because I'm getting impatient and I'm sloppy. It looks pretty good here. Small little needle nose, like licks. By the time I'm on the other side of the wing, I'm just like, just throw it on there, get it done. And that's terrible. You spend all this time, you have so much pride, and you want it to be great, and you're rushing through it. And being big, you have no way to hide it with a little null oil and hope that no one looks there, because it's right there, see? So now that it's dried, it looks terrible again. I have no blend, so I used CALADOR Sky. This was the paint I had just used earlier, and I couldn't remember the name for. But I put a lot of water into it to try and cut the edges of that edging paint. You see how sharp they were? Because they look just like lick, 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 lick. So this watery paste mess, yeah. So that's what I learned. The bigger something you paint is, the more easy it is for someone looking at it to see it's not that good of a job, actually. What do we worry about when we do minis? Their eyes? Who the hell sees their eyes? Just put a little fleck of dark. Now I'm going to repeat the same process I did on the wings inside his ribs. Now imagine that. Look at those ribs. They've already had overspray from the can, or from my airbrush. They're kind of blue, those ribs, but not evenly. See those splotches everywhere? And I can't touch the splotches up because then it won't match. And I can't match it because I can't recreate the airbrush in that exact area. So at this point, I realized I've learned a lesson. I'm going to share that lesson with you guys. I'm going to go ahead and paint over this, as I'm doing right now, with lighter and lighter to make it look like there's sort of a blue fire or energy in there. I'm not going to use the edging paint, but I am going to use white. And then I'm also going to dry brush, which is what I'm doing right here. I have 2 blue dry brushes, and by running the brushes vertically up and down, it helps blend all those colors that I put in there with the dry brush. And it helped hide some of my garbage, right? Here's another one, CHRONUS blue. This is like a sky blue, like a lighter blue. Now, I only did it near the top. I didn't go all the way to the bottom under his belly because I wanted down there to stay like this dark, the Leviathan, and all the colors I sprayed down there. And finally, ceramite white, little teeny application, gentle, gentle. Remember, you make a mistake, you can't fix it now. But all of the bones that I oversprayed are gonna stay oversprayed. These eye sockets, terrible. I'm just filling them in with Basilicanium gray, I think. Now I have to paint his skull white again with some more wraith bone to cover up all the spills I made with the blues outside of the eye sockets, but that's easy enough. Put a paper towel and spray back on. And now for all of his fingernails and toenails and etc., I use more straight Basilium gray just to keep them in line with everything else. So I'm done with this project. I also painted his teeth too. I didn't catch that on film. I just used Ungor something. It's at the beginning with some dry brushing on top of gray. I was unhappy with it at this point. I posted on Instagram something about being unhappy. No, during episode 50 and all that. But guess what? At the end of the day, I really am happy with how it turned out. It is huge. I learned a lot about painting so big of a creature. I took the extra time I needed to do it, and everyone seemed to be cool with that, so I'm happy. So let's take a look at the finished product all assembled. Here he is from the back angle. I actually like the way the white crispy wings turned out with those little flashes of white. Almost looks like magical energy. Yeah, no, it was a good, there's a skull there, that's cool. I really like the marble effect. I never done anything like that before. There he is head on. And you know, this is one of the biggest minis I've ever had, and to have finished it and have it now for my shelf, just looking at me, is pretty happy. Makes me pretty happy. He's got that wicked whip on the end of his tail. Those island colors I think look great. They just accent his blues so nicely, as opposed to say going with greens of normal foresty kind of colors. Yeah, look at that. Cool. It was a good project. I'm glad I hope you enjoyed this. Also, taking these pictures was tricky, right? Because it's so big, and my DSLR camera has a depth of field which I had to constantly fight to get all of it sharp and clear. I also applied heavier on my spray. I didn't mention this earlier. His arms and legs, like the top parts, they're darker than the rest of his bones, just to help offset from the marble that he's perched on. So anyways, that is our friend, whatever his name is, Oblivion's Flame, the Dracolich, in the body of Cheracharatraslath potentially. Hopefully that never comes to pass per episode 50 of Paint to Life, but that's up to you guys. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed the long-winded rant about that. Hope the marble techniques help. If you ever paint something like this, let me know in the comments below if you want anything more during these videos explained. I will be glad to read them and get back to you. Otherwise, that's all I have for tonight. I hope everyone's safe and well in your family. I'm GMA Tank. Good night. Wash your hands, people.